Welcome to Prelude to Ulysses. Alex wipes orange juice from his mouth. 45 minutes of this. This is Alex Reads Ancient Evenings by Norman Mailer, Part 4. This is a long one. I might have to cut it into pieces. I gotta walk the dog and go to work. What happened last time? Collected Osiris's body. Then they opened his mouth. And it's kind of smelled nice. Okay. Part 4. If you think, said Menenhedet I, to enter mysteries you have not begun, the story I have offered is no more than the ripple of a light on water. While all is true, there is a secret behind every secret I offered. I, as an example, was one of the 14 priests Isis kissed. If it was 1,000 years ago, still it gave me courage to explore into many matters that are forbidden. We sat there in silence, my mind now shamefully aware of the handicap of my imperfect memory. As if like a cripple with one arm and one leg, I tried to put a saddle on a horse. I could not comprehend his life. Did he lie? Had he ever been a priest kissed by Isis? And was he ever a general who won so many battles that he could live on the gifts given him by the pharaoh? I seem to remember that as so. But indeed, which pharaoh could it be? Deep as my anger for Hathfertiti was the desire to see her, if only to ask her after these simple matters. Why could I not remember stories about my great-grandfather? Once again, I knew a sense of oppression. He sat back in his chair, and I could notice for the first time, it was in fact the first time my fear of him had diminished sufficiently to look at anything but his eyes, that the legs of his chair were of gold and had been cast as the forelegs and hind legs of a lion. Menenhedet now had the expression of a lion. He was indeed as dignified as an old general who lives in the recollection of his old exploits. Yes, he said, a man can feel accomplishment if he begins as the son of a whore, yet so distinguishes himself as to rise to command the gold rank of Ra, the horses of Set, the hidden of Ammon, and the foundry of Ptah. Those 4 great divisions were at one time under my command. Yet I began in the ranks. A child of a whore is favored, after all, with knowledge others do not have. His mother being familiar with many embraces, so my sword was always ready for the flash of the other sword. I had a quick eye, and I learned to think in ways that others do not. I had been, after all, one of the lovers of my mother. Ugh. And of my mother. He cackled. He winked. The palm of one hand was now clapped to his brow, and the other grasped himself at the scrotum. Crude was the move, and a huge humor to him. As above, so below, he choked. He's banging his mom. Wait, no, his mom's still alive. I don't know. It could mean a few things. I found myself as repelled by the sudden shifts as I was confused. In the elegant surface of his manners was a crack through which ooze from time to time would... In the elegant surface of his manners was a crack through which would ooze from time to time the worst putrescence of an old man's thoughts. Yes, he said, I was the lover of your mother, and your mother was sweeter than my mother. His merriment washed through my dignity. We laughed together. I was horrified at how little character was possessed by my Ka. I might as well be an uprooted weed blown about by every desert wind. Did you really become one of the 14 priests of Isis? I could not help but ask. Or did you lie to me? I lied to you. The traveler from distant places is an everlasting liar. He smiled. I was not one of the original 14 priests of Isis, any more than my mother was a whore. In truth, she was only a peasant. Yet I did not lie to you altogether. The life of the dead is maintained by a careful repetition of their history. So each year, on the banks of the Duad, Isis passes us, selects from our ranks 14 men who used to be priests, and repeats the kiss that founded her husband's temples. I am always selected, but that is because she appeared to me in a spell when I was still alive and embraced me. He gave an elegant, aristocratic, and utterly exhausted flutter of his fingers, as if the hand that once carried the heaviest sword would not have the vitality now to pick the stem of a flower. The gods, he said wearily, are capable of anything. They do everything. And in sudden wrath, he said, that is why they have real need of Mot. Mot. If not for Mot, there would be no end to the destruction they cause, nor the wild passions they strew when they turn into animals. The abominable situation is that their transformations depend on shit, blood sacrificing, and fucking. And they respect none of it. They do not appreciate how magic is obedient to the deepest principle. When I could only mutter that I did not understand what he said, he looked at me and declared, in its true exchange, one cannot gain a great deal unless one is willing to dare losing all. That is how the loveliest plunder is found. You do not buy a few words of power, say them over a colored powder, sprinkle it on the sand, and ask for the dancing girl to come to your hut tonight. The girl may certainly arrive, and she will dance at your doorstep, but if you have no true power yourself, then she will also leave behind an inflammation on the head of your penis, and eggs of vermin in the hairs of your thighs. One has to pay a price for magic. Put the colored powder on the sand, but also take a vow to draw your sword the next day at the first insult, and obey that vow, whether the dancing girl brings poverty or pleasure. That is the obligation. Look for the risk. We must obey it every time. There is no credit to be drawn from the virtue of one's past. Not even once. Not in magic. In piety, but not in magic. Look to the example of Isis. She was a noble woman by every measure, a loyal wife, a brave soldier, practiced at magic, supreme in her will. Yet at the end, and it is at the end of each trial of magic that the worst ambush awaits, she betrayed her family. But she did not. Let me tell you again, there is the magic we invoke and the magic that calls upon us. Do you recall that Isis dropped the 14th piece of the body in the salts of Osiris in the salts of Yeb, and saw battles to come between Horus and Set? That was a warning to find proper sacrifice, or there would be no peace. She heard her own voice tell her to slaughter a bull, but as she killed the beast, her voice also told her that the sacrifice was not great enough to compensate for the evil powers of Set. She must add the blood of a more painful loss. She must cut off her own head and replace it with the bull's face. Menenhedet now giggled. When I asked him why he laughed, he remarked, I am thinking of the fearsome creature who hides in the little feather of Mot. She carries the principle of balance to the point of torture. Naturally, Isis protested. I can promise you that she did not fail to recite the virtues of the 14 years of her wanderings. Indeed, she was so eloquent in presenting her achievements of the past as safeguards for the present that Mot actually reduced her demand. It would now be sufficient for Isis to lay her forehead on the hairy ridge between the horns of the bull. In time, over months to come, she would certainly develop horns, and her features would grow to look like a cow. Like her mom? Yep. Mom's name is Nut. Isis said no. After 14 years in the company of Anubis, she was weary of the ugliness one feels when obliged to look every day at a dull face. The vanity of Isis in this hour was greater than her loyalty to Horus. So she would only offer the simple sacrifice of the bull, and when the funeral was done and Isis rose, they returned across the storms to the new court of the Ka of Osiris, where they would raise their son to confront Set in the wars to come. I don't really understand what's going on. Is this in the afterlife? No, she has powers. I'm a little confused here. So Isis, at this point, is dead because she met her sister Mot and tried to explain that she spent some good time in her life, especially in the 14 years searching for her husband's body. And then she turns into a cow. Okay. It's alright. Just continue. Now, since Set's powers had been reduced, the heat of his wrath no longer scorched the earth. After the yearly flood, Egypt flowered into so many oases that they grew together into forests. And Horus, conceived on the open sea, prospered in this damp climate, and grew powerful in his ungainly way. If his shoulders took on the strength of a bear, he moved nonetheless like an ape. Bent over weak legs, his sense of well-being was strong only in the trees, or down by the exhalations of the swamp. Yet even at such agreeable times he did not smile, for as he grew, Horus directed every thought towards the increase of his strength. Laughter, for instance, he did not permit himself. It relaxed his muscles and thereby allowed too much force to return to the earth. Here, my great-grandfather's voice came nearer to me, and we traveled together in the thoughts of Horus, as he brooded on the weakness of his lower limbs, and listened to the talk of war. If many thought the battle should take place between Osiris and Set, the gods, after some debate, concluded that Osiris was too valuable to be lost. The Ka, being only one of the 7 souls and spirits of the living, is outnumbered by just such a proportion of 7 to 1 for any test of might. Of course, some gods argued that there should be no contest at all because Set was unworthy. He looked like a brigand. A brigand is a bandit, especially one of a band of robbers in mountain or forest regions. He looked like a brigand. He had grown heavy, and his red hair and red face were choleric. His skin was the color of a boil. His beard was the hue of dark blood. There were ulcers on his face and hands, and veins in the bulb of his nose. His strength was fearsome, but as foul as his sweat was his breath, since he drank nothing but wine that came from profane grapes. Indeed, he cultivated vines grown from the blood of thieves, so foolhardy as to have robbed a temple, after which the thieves were devoured by a herd of lions at their own oasis. Now when Set drank of this vine grown from the ground moist with thieves' blood, his breathing had the sounds of a storm. He ate the meat of the wild boar and left its juice on his fingers in order that his hands should never slip from a weapon. He lived in old skins whose scent was so repulsive that his servants deserted him, one by one, to swear loyalty to Horus. Even his favorite mistress, Puanit, Puanit, got up from his body one night, washed in the Nile, and set out for camp of Horus. Set, on awakening, went to follow her, but became so drunk he fell asleep in the mud and returned home looking filthier than ever. as if Geb had been indeed his father. Who's Geb? Word came back of Puanet's exploits among Horus's men, and Set was now ridiculed by his few remaining servants. Puanet described the boils on his bottom as fiercer than the sores of his face. She spoke of his testicles as slack, and only referred to Set by the contemptible name Smu, S-M-U. All the while she made every attempt to seduce Horus, even declaring herself ready to lick his feet. The god's toes, she promised, would be more nimble for the approaching battle. She started a fire of dead vines from the grove of his profane grapes, and took the flame into his lungs. Then he blew this fire over the wine, and was therefore intoxicated to a degree greater than he had known before. In the force of this drunkenness he was ready for war, and left to seek Horus. Set started a fire. There, in the other camp, Osiris was asking his son, and as he asked each morning, "What is the most noble act you can perform?" "It is," said Horus, "to avenge my father and mother for the evils done to them." So, are they alive? I don't understand what stage that they're in. Set's still alive. Seems like Osiris is back to life, but they were talking about Isis. I don't know. She doesn't actually look like a bull. I think she does look like a cow. I'm a little confused. This chapter is a little confusing. To avenge my father and mother for the evil done to them, which was cut them into pieces. Then Osiris took Horus through exercises to strengthen his legs. Horus attempted, for example, to strangle an animal between his thighs, although so far he had done no better than to wrench the neck of a calf. On this morning, Osiris asked a new question. Which animal is the most useful for combat? "A horse," said Horus. "A horse, of course," said Horus. Why not a lion?" asked Osiris. "If I needed assistance, I would think of a lion. But I want an animal to carry me in pursuit of Set once he runs away." "You are ready," said Osiris. Before this, there was little question in my mind about the outcome. But now I know my son will be Lord of the living. I would be Jester of the dead. Chewed up by a lion. Okay. And he promised a horse if the need should arise for pursuit. Then Osiris told him to wait for Set in the open plain outside the walls of Memphis, and try to lure him into the swamp where neither would have footing. That way, the contest would depend on the strength of their arms. In great atmosphere of confidence, Horus went off to meet his uncle. In the last moment, Isis even gave him the withered thumb of Set she had used to guide her through the swamp. This thumb, she informed her son, could extricate him from one great trial, so he must wait to use it wisely. Menenhedet looked at me, however, as if dissatisfied. "What is wrong," he asked, "with the training of Horus?" "In it I don't find," I replied, "any of the divine intelligence of Osiris." "It is not present," agreed Menenhedet. "Osiris doesn't seem vengeful. I will tell you that he is not fond of Horus. The boy is void of charm. Moreover, Isis is bored these days. She speaks fiercely of the youngest gods, revered by everyone as the noblest wife of all. The pleasures of flirtation are closed. While she thinks her son is a dank and solemn monotony of strength, she must pretend to enthusiasm for his mission. Horus, in his turn, is ignorant of his parents' feelings. His life is so empty of interest that he only knows that he has not much desire to become the Lord of the living. When his exercise is done, his mind is empty." Yet in the camp of Horus, not one servant or warrior dares to speak of disaster. The most obvious difficulties won't be discussed. Horus, for example, is utterly innocent of the sentiments of real combat. He does not know how panic can swallow the mind when facing a deadly man. He has not seen the eye of that opponent. Besides, the camp has been disrupted by Puanet. If, in preparation for battle, there is any mood worse than false confidence, it is carnal mischief. The most sensible exercise for Horus is to concentrate upon his legs. Instead, he is twitching with unaccustomed pleasure at the thought his toes might soon be licked. Well, it's fun. Well, they meet in the field Osiris had suggested, in what are now the gardens about the temple of Ptah. But then it was only the edge of an unnamed marsh, and the followers of Horus and the few remaining servants of Set came together and formed a great circle. A great circle about the two warriors. Thoth, Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, and 4 other gods appeared to serve as judges. In that circle, all waited, and Horus stared at Set across a distance of 20 paces. A silence descended into the grove, and it lasted until the moment Horus could not bear to wait longer. He took out his sword, a sound of withdrawal as noisy and as quiet as a snake crossing a bed of shells, and Set's breath was as hoarse in reply as if combat had commenced. Yet when he removed his sword from the scabbard, it was with the quick and whistling sound of a blade well drawn, and they moved then toward each other. But slowly the air filled with caution. Here my great-grandfather extended an arm as if to share this combat with me, and again I could see what he saw. Now Horus and Set came into reach. When each slammed a sword against each other's blades, the advantage was to Horus. His arms were stronger. That was clear from the shock to both, and his hands were fast. The smell of Set grew rank with the sweat of twice fortified wine. Aware that the power he took from his grapes might soon evaporate, he went on attack, looking to confuse Horus with rapid moves from side to side. But his attack was soon worn out by these exertions. Set drew back a step. Each tried to stir, each man searched for breath. Each was wondering whether the other was as quickly used up as himself. Now they continued by the quiver of an elbow or the inclination of a knee, just at a distance of each other. I'm gonna have to pause there. Well, note where I am. Maybe I can finish this before work, but I gotta go do some stuff.